everybody, Joe Moore here. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, 920 edition. Surprise. Surprise guest with Kyle and I, Michelle Janikian. How you doing, Michelle?
Great. Thanks for having me on this most wonderful of mushroom holidays.
Can't wait. All right, before we jump in a little bit about this, how to support us. So we have a Patreon. You can make a small monthly donation, $2 or more a month at patreon.com/psychedelics today. Contact us if you want other ways to contribute that way. We also have courses at psychedeliceducationcenter.com and psychedelicstoday.com. Our next course starts in just a few days, Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, on September 23. So check it out. We'd love to have you. It is education for professionals and those interested in being more professionally involved in the field. 47 hours total with some CEs available. So check it out, read up, see if you want to join. It's an 8-week program, and you'll definitely begin your networking. So hope you go check it out over at psychedelicstoday.com. All right, on with the show. Michelle, you, about 2 years ago, published a book. It's called Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion.
Yes.
Oof, nailed it. Cool. So it's made a splash, right? Like you've certainly, I think, made a dent in the space through not only your journalism, writing for online mags, and editor for us, but with this book, you've made a dent, I think. And I'm just kind of curious what it's been like over the last 2 years since the book has come out.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think so. It can be hard to tell what kind of splash you made because my book came out like a month or two before the pandemic started. So like all of my plans, right, to like go and meet the people and teach them how to use mushrooms and do a tour and events and go to the conferences, like it all got put on hold. And at first I thought for a few months, maybe weeks, it's almost like 2 years later. My book came out in December 2019. So, it was in late February, early March that like the world shut down, right? And so it's been a little hard to tell, but like on the internet, it does, I do have people reaching out, or they'll share an Instagram story and tag me that they're reading my book, like in the woods or on the beach or just anywhere. And that's like just so special and meaningful. And to think that there are folks that own my book that read through the whole thing is really kind of a lot to process, actually. And to think about then their like own journey work and like how I might have had an influence is a lot, but it is an honor. And I'm just really glad that it is having a bit of an impact on, in both the space and just in individual people's lives.
Yeah. What was the inspiration behind the book?
I just really felt like mushrooms are a pretty safe psychedelic for folks to experiment with on their own, like maybe compared to ayahuasca or 5-MeO. Like this is a plant medicine that has a history of very profound ceremonial use, but also a history of like a lot of young people in every little subculture in America since the 60s, experimenting, especially like in the counterculture and these like more edgy communities, like experimenting with, altering their consciousness, seeing the world in a new way. And I just really wanted to give like just the normal everyday person, like I kept thinking my mom, just all the information they would need to have a safe and like responsible psychedelic mushroom experience. And so I go through a lot of advice. Like I think people should start really low and slow, like dose wise, how to prepare your set and setting, maybe who to have your experience with, like the basics of integration, and also the basics of like therapy and the other, ways to use mushrooms just for context or to see if that speaks to you more. But just really having everything in one place for folks who want to learn more about mushrooms or possibly use them. That was the motivation.
You made a fun and controversial point that I want to get into because I think it's important. Starting low.
Yeah.
It's almost a heresy, right? but it's how I feel about it. Like, why do I want to hang out with somebody on 10 grams on their first try? That sounds dumb.
Well, all right. I think I think the controversy for me is more like to start at a full eighth, right? 3.5
Right.
grams. And that's how a lot of
Uh-huh.
us did start. It's how I started. And I think that's still how some folks will want to and continue to have their first experience.
Sure.
But for me, I write about in the book, like a lot of folks who I spoke to who did that kind of regretted it. And they they had too strong of an experience to really process or learn from, or any of these other types of things we say that mushrooms can like help us in our lives, because it was kind of overwhelming and they were young. And so that was my intention with the dose chapter, and saying I think maybe the best way is to start low, 1 gram, or even a microdose, 0.25, grams of psilocybin cubensis, more so you could learn how to navigate the psychedelic space and you'll feel comfortable there. So then you can like incrementally work your way up to a higher dose trip. So maybe someday you do want to take 3.5 grams or more or 10. I don't know. It's up to you. I don't judge. But like, it's like learning how to navigate the space, learning how to hold your own space in a way. And really learning, like, I have some navigation techniques in the book, like how to breathe, how to ground yourself when it feels really out of control and kind of scary, or just like full of anxiety or nausea or something on the come up. Like when you learn how to trip, when you learn how to take mushrooms, then you'll be more prepared for a higher dose trip when things might get a little weird, right? As we know,
Right.
researching this field daily, like a little transpersonal, a little very deeply emotional, a lot of tears, or a lot of like unconscious material rising up, like whatever it is, it'll be easier for you to deal with if you have experience. Yeah, people argue me the 3.5 thing all the time, but this is for total beginners. Like this is for my mom, remember, guys? So like, do what you will, tell people what you will, but I was talking to just the normal everyday person without a lot of experience altering their consciousness to get into it in a way that won't have them do like one trip and never want to touch it again, right?
Right. How to have a relationship with it over the long term, as opposed to one and freak show and then you're out. Yeah, and this is a very different context from like a Hopkins NYU situation, which I really appreciate. It's how do we try to stay safe and still do interesting journey work and get in touch with things that you wouldn't otherwise get in touch with. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So like overall, people have been like pretty welcoming, but it sounds like you've made some interesting colleagues, I guess, on the internet, like people that are kind of like against some of it. But
I mean, honestly, like
yeah,
not even that much. Sure, people have
yeah,
opinions and they're entitled to them, because it's not really
right.
like a step by step, this is how you do it right. That's like not my intention whatsoever.
Yeah,
Like I'm really not one of those people who think there's a right or wrong way to do anything, let alone mushrooms. But yeah, I
love it.
mean, sometimes people disagree, but I kind of just, that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's awesome. Um, I really appreciate that kind of approach. It's huge. We're so different, person to person, that it's nice to be able to allow that. There's a lot of people that don't allow that kind of freedom, and I think that's really important. Um,
Seems kind of anti-psychedelic to me, but you all know me, and I got all my opinions too, and like whatever, they're not the beginning or the end of the world, they're just opinions.
right, exactly. Um, yeah, Kyle, I don't know. Like, do you want to go anywhere here?
Well, I just kind of missed part of it. My internet just disconnected, so I'm sorry about that. But something that I guess I wanted to bring up just about starting low, and I guess Joe, you kind of touched on it, was just this idea of like building a relationship with medicine. And I think that that's important to emphasize. And I think this comes back to some of the work that I've been teaching over the while, and something that has come up through various conversations, how these are like relational medicines, or relational, we'll say, substances, where how do we develop that relationship with it? And starting low and getting to know the energy of that medicine can be really important for then to navigate a little bit deeper into the experience. And it seems kind of weird or sometimes woo-woo, I think, when I talk about that. But I think it's important. And I don't know, I guess a lot of people overlook that at times, because there is, I guess, this like, you know, thing about Terence McKenna, right? It's like, we need to kill off the ego, or we need to do 5 dried grams in silent darkness, and we need to take a heroic dose. And it's just interesting around that like cultural idea. And, you know, can we approach it in a different way? Even though it may not feel as sexy as, like, you know, taking a lot of mushrooms and silent darkness and going really deep in, versus, yeah, taking this, you know, slower approach, building a relationship with the medicine, understanding what it's about. I think it's really important to emphasize.
Yeah, I agree. And then I think 5 grams is a great goal for someone to have. I don't even know if Terrence would have encouraged anyone to take 5 grams on their first go. I even have a quote from him in the book about, like, you know, maybe who mushrooms, not like who, well, who should like be careful, or maybe who, like, he has this great quote, like, it's like, if you wouldn't ask this person to like lead you on an expedition to through the desert, or like if this person couldn't handle a weekend trip to France, like maybe they're not also maybe they're not the best person to start like with 5 grams anyway, right? Like, you need to be a kind of strong, headstrong person to come out of that space, you know, with your marbles still together, I think. And I don't know. I just think that 5 grams can be a really deep experience, and it's one that I love. I think it can be a beautiful place. But again, like, I don't know if I would have been so beautiful when I was 17 on my first time, like, just, you know, not knowing what to expect and not doing any
Mm.
preparation. But in the clinical trials, I think that, you know, with all the prep that they do and the therapy, the milligrams that they give the clients are equivalent to more like 8 grams. So it's still like not an impossible thing for your first journey to be that deep. But we're not talking about clinical trials with this book, right? We're talking about folks in their own home, on camping trips, and things like that. How mushrooms have been generally used in America for the last like 70 years.
Mm.
Yeah. And have you weaved any of your insights, like living down in Mexico and interacting with those communities, on, say, like how, I don't know, have you done much like research, or sitting with people with like that indigenous perspective around mushroom use? Or is this really like a lot of the information is oriented towards, like, yeah, Western use?
I do have a chapter on ceremonial use where I interviewed Inti Garcia Flores, who is a historian from the Mazatec community. He's not a curandero. Um, about like the traditional use, and you can read about that in my ceremonial chapter. Personally, I haven't done a lot of ceremonial work like in an indigenous context. I don't live in the state where that is such a normal thing. That's more in Oaxaca, and I live in Chiapas. I do research it, and I do love like going on mushroom identification, like walks and events. And I actually am planning a trip up to Huautla, I think next month, for the very tail end of the rainy season, to maybe start diving into my own ceremonial work up there. But more actually, I want to
Cool.
go to just learn about the culture, and my friend Inti, and like beyond the psychedelic culture of the Mazatec community, like there's so much interesting stuff up there, and ceremonies and traditions, and like going to walk in those woods and learn how to identify those plants. Like, that's actually what's a little more interesting to me, because to work
I
in
think
an
it's fascinating.
indigenous Mexican context is very different. It's kind of intense. It's very Catholic, like the syncretic religion, like spirituality there is like, it's going to be a little intense for me as someone with like a Catholic mother, and I just haven't felt ready until like a year ago, and then it was the middle of the pandemic, and I didn't feel right going to an indigenous community unvaccinated and things like that. But I mean, I do think that living in Mexico vastly affects my worldview, like more than I can actually articulate, because I've been here for so
Mm.
long, and I find it hard to relate to Americans now. And there's probably like a lot going on there that I couldn't even explain to you until I've been in America for like 2 years again, and to be like, wait, actually, it was all of this. But I'm kind of a little too deep in it at the moment to see it very clearly, I think.
Mm.
It's a good observation, and yeah, the syncretic traditions are really interesting, but I think yeah, at times probably quite triggering to us. Those of us who are kind of raised in Episcopal Catholic stuff, seeing how it's playing out in traditional communities and there's more syncretic form could get really rough,
I do
especially
like
if we've had that guilt.
Yeah, well, Catholic guilt is such a real thing. Having an Irish mother is like actually a whole thing that when I peel back the onion on mushroom trips, I'm learning there's a lot of layers of guilt and shame in there that really don't belong. They're just there because it's our culture. But like even beyond that, like there's so much like even here in Mexico, like that it's just there's so much to it. But what I do want to say is that I have gotten quite intimate with the local indigenous community, the Tzotzil, and they're so much different. They don't use mushrooms. They use alcohol for spirituality. They have a liquor called
Hmm.
posh that is very much involved in their ceremonies and like connecting to the spirit world and healing work. And there's just so much more to like indigenous plant medicine culture than like mushrooms and peyote and stuff in Mexico. It's so deep, it's so beautiful, can be so out there, even for Mexicans that are not from indigenous communities. Like I remember once I met this woman from like Baja California, and she looked at me and she's like, "This is weird for me too." And I was like, "Yo también." Like I understand. Like this is different. Like this is not what we were raised. Like, but that's okay, and it's so beautiful and fascinating to learn from. And there's so many ways to expand your worldview and your perspective. And I think that's one of them.
Super interesting thing about like alcohol rights and how people use alcohol in those different contexts just reminds me of like some of the stories Martin Prechtel talks about in his books of in the Guatemalan Mayan village of people just, I forget what the drink that they would drink,
Probably
but
aguardiente, I think.
something with like corn, like fermented corn.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
assuming.
basically what posh is. Sometimes it's made from fermented caña. But the Guatemala, because it's so close to Chiapas, the culture is very similar, like in that
Oh,
regard.
interesting.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
that
just
doesn't
getting
surprise
drunk and the
me.
villagers just being knocked out for like days on end after their like ceremonies, and it's like, oh, that has a spiritual flair to it. Versus like, yeah, it's just so interesting to hear stuff about that.
Yeah, we're very focused on like mushrooms and ayahuasca and peyote, ibogaine, but there's so much more to it. Like that's not quite psychedelic, but it's still like ceremonial. It's so interesting. There's so much I think for myself and the rest of the psychedelic community to learn from these other traditions for sure.
Just thinking about how demonized alcohol is, sometimes rightfully so, but it has been used religiously in many cultures, and the African tradition, Gnostic voodoo, hoodoo, whatever you want to call it, depending on your geography, like it's a big part. Leaving offerings of rum to different entities or gods, it's part of it. Drinking is also can be part of it too. Even in Catholic rites, like wine.
Mm.
So yeah, it's alcohol has just been with us for so long that we have a really long and complex relationship with it. And I appreciate you, Michelle, pointing that out. This that we have such a you know maybe shallow or maybe just premature judgments on what plants are most important here, like peyote, etc. It's a complex topic for sure, and no joke. But yeah, it's good to know, and it's interesting that that's right in your back door.
I just like, for me, just like pushing the edge has always been like my passion as a journalist. So like at first, right, I got into cannabis, and then cannabis became very normal, and so I got into psychedelics. And I don't know, maybe just like I just for me the interesting things are happening at the edge of the conversation. Like and yeah, maybe like alcohol, ceremonial alcohol use, or just like there's so much more I think to the conversation around mushrooms and psychedelics than like is being talked about in most circles right now. It's I guess like I've been a little, I don't know the word, salty maybe
Mm,
about, like psilocybin mushrooms being exclusively like legalized and used for therapeutic use. And not that I don't believe that mushrooms can have a therapeutic value, like clearly. It's just so much more to it than that for me. It's ceremonial and religious. It's transpersonal and weird. Like it's aliens, it's trees. Like I don't know, it's literally life. And to just narrow it down to this little box of like, well, it's only okay with a doctor with this many years of schooling and da 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 in this hospital. And I just get a little bored. Like I'm a little bit bored. Like what's gonna happen to mushrooms? Could they possibly get boring? Like no, it's not possible. So you know me, my edgy brain has been researching aliens and has been commissioning work on like what is the transpersonal and what is spiritual emergency, and I've been really enjoying it. And
mm,
that's just kind of how I feel my role is here, and to just keep sharing these things with people, because we could all repeat each other and say the same narrative over and over, but like what are you going to learn from that, and what's the fun in that? It's kind of where I've been at lately.
Yeah. So I guess what have you seen from beginners? Like, have you seen a number of beginners come through your book and kind of report back on some really interesting experiences like the transpersonal, or is it kind of different than that?
I get I don't get I mean, that's an interesting question. I haven't dug that deep into the experiences people have had from my book. People do reach out and send me long messages on like how it helped, and I love hearing that, and it's beautiful and I appreciate them even if I can't respond to all of them. Um one kind of trend, I don't know if this is considered transpersonal, but one kind of interesting experience I've heard from more than one person is that they were a little scared about taking mushrooms. Maybe they had done it before, or they never have done. And they read my whole book and really liked it. And then they listened to like me on podcasts and just kind of like got familiar with my voice and what I say, and people like that I'm like kind of non-judgmental and just like, do you, it's cool, I don't care. And then they take mushrooms and they'd get scared again, but they like hear my voice in their head,
mm,
and I'm like there with them being like, it's cool dude, like just chill, you'll be fine. And that helps them, and they come out with like a really great experience, and I had such a large part of it, and that has been like a really special thing that I struggle to process, but actually I'm so honored when people tell me that, and I'm so glad I could be that rock for them. It's so beautiful. But that's I've heard that from more than one fan, so that's an interesting one. But as far as like having entity experiences, like maybe I've had some people tell me like meeting the mushrooms or talking to trees and things like that. The normal stuff, you know.
We know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, the transpersonal is interesting and it's hard to talk about, especially in a public forum or to strangers. Um,
yeah.
I've had a number of people bring stuff up like that to me, and it's really like I want to be able to help them. So it's like context matters. So in like a breathwork retreat, that's one thing, but like in crossing at a party, like I don't know that I can really help you too much here. Like I can give you like one or two pointers, but it's like it's an interesting jam. So let's see. Do we want to jump into 920, or do we got some more stuff to say here?
I got some things that are floating around in my head, but it might be a little off topic, but a little on topic. Just Michelle, you're talking about like this healing and curing aspect of plant medicines and mushrooms, and then the weirdness behind it, the transpersonal, people having scary experiences. What is all that? So recently just got this book called Plant Teachers by Jeremy Narby, and we're actually going to be interviewing him next week. So I'm going to ask him about this passage. But this really stood out to me. And so this chapter is really about tobacco. And the title is called Medicine or Malice, Medicine and Malice. So one of his teachers is talking about the tobacco's soul or personality. And he says about tobacco, he doesn't want to frighten you, but what happens is he wants to teach you malice. In other words, in the spiritual world, in the forest, in the water, there are strong spirits that can harm you. And this is tobacco wants to teach you. And then, well, why does it want to teach you this, in our opinion? Let's say that it's an activity for the spirits of the plants. Just as medicine is an activity and curing and healing brings satisfaction, for plants it's the same. Malice is an activity that they carry out on their own satisfaction. But for human beings, malice is painful, unsatisfactory, and difficult. The power of these plants can cause human losses. This is their mission, to teach us to practice their activities according to their line, to cause harm. Piercing the human body in a way that causes loss of life is an activity for them. And conversely, medicine is also an activity that we develop to heal, to give life, and to make life longer. And tobacco itself does indeed make life longer because it cures you. So they're talking about mapacho specifically. But I just thought that was like a really interesting paragraph to read a few weeks ago, just thinking about some of those really, really scary experiences on psychedelics where the plants are kind of teaching you, some stuff. And it's like, wait, we constantly talk about this healing aspect of them, but like, I've definitely chatted with people over the years of like, the plants or the spirits of the plants, like it felt like there was like, wanting to cause harm, or like, it had its own agenda there. And I think this is what you're talking about with the transpersonal, the weird, like, is it always healing? Like, what is the plant's agenda at times? So I thought that was a really interesting thing. I definitely want to chat to Jeremy about that a little bit more in depth next week when we record with him.
That'd be cool. I can't wait to listen to that one. I mean, that brings up a couple things for me. Like, for one, like, I guess sometimes I feel like when folks only make their psychedelic work about healing, like it seems a bit self-centered. It does feel a bit like if you make it all about yourself and healing like your problems, which to the plant and to the rest of the universe kind of seems a bit petty, perhaps. Like, not to be rude, like we all deserve to heal ourselves, but like I think that when we go in with just an intention to do that, we are putting like blinders on, like horse blinders, and we are not going to be able to see the rest of what's going on here. Like, it's bigger than you. And that's kind of why it's so frustrating that psychedelics are only being accepted and talked about in this individual healing modality, because it's like, I just feel like we're going to miss something if we keep going in with this very self-centered objective. Like, there's a lot more to learn from these plants and medicines than are just about ourselves. And if that's your intention, you're going to miss, I don't know, like so much. I think that there's so many lessons bigger than our histories that can be learned. Maybe not, it's not all about healing our personal dilemmas. Like, I don't know, but that's what the commercialization of psychedelics teaches us. That's all they're really safe to use for. And if we go in with these bigger intentions, then maybe we'll go crazy, or I don't know what's going to happen. But mushrooms are tricksters. We have to be a bit careful as a culture welcoming mushrooms in. I mean, sure, let's do it. They're fun. They're like the life of the party. They should absolutely be part of our culture. But like, giving them so much responsibility, like healing mental illness of the world, I don't know. For me, I don't know if that's like actually the best idea. As someone who communicates and listens to them quite often, I'm like, all right. I mean, I'm also kind of a trickster, so I'm kind of excited to see how this plays out, but like only in that way. Not that I think that I don't know if it's going to end very well, but it's interesting nonetheless, and interesting to think why mushrooms came up right now too.
Mm.
Like, we could say it's all about our depressed humankind and we need to heal that, but like, I think it's bigger than that. I think that's a self-centered way to look at it, and that maybe it's more about our planet that's dying, that we're killing, or something even bigger than that, or something that's not even like about healing, perhaps. But I don't know.
Can you talk about that trickster thing a little more? Like, in what way do you think like the mushroom embodies like this trickster archetype?
I mean, we could talk about trickster archetypes, but I'm more talking about like the personality of the mushroom doesn't always have your best intentions in mind. I haven't gone too deep into like the archetype of the trickster. That's maybe a question for someone else. But for me, as someone who knows the mushrooms and also DMT, I think DMT is a trickster. Uh, I just mean it like a child. Like in Mexico, they're called like the little saints or the children, like los niños, because they're like kids. They like to play games, and they might be playing games with you, like, and your mind and your surroundings. Um, and you should always like actually have the ability to like hold yourself in that space and know your own truth, because the mushrooms, they're going to try to trick you maybe sometimes, and you have to be the one to decide what is true and what isn't.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, that's something that we chat about often, just this idea of discerning information when you are in that state and how important that is. And I think, I don't know if it was in the Brotherhood of Screaming Abyss, Dennis McKenna, or it might have been some other interview, but talking about just, I think it was maybe Terrence eating a bunch of mushrooms and just being so confused. But there was a statement in there that this medicine is trickster medicine. And you can't always take everything at face value and believe everything. And I think that's important to really sit with. I mean, I've had tons and tons of trickster experiences, and they just sit there and throw stuff at you and laugh at you, and then you go, okay. And that's tough. But I think sometimes when we don't recognize that, we want to take everything as face value and go, oh no, this is truth. But again, coming back to this relationship, do you have a relationship? What does it want from you as well? And I think that's something to consider for thinking about this as relational. And that was something a teacher of mine years ago brought up to me when I was asking him about psychedelics integrating into Western culture. And he said, most indigenous peoples had relationships with plants. Western people don't have that relationality to psychedelics as, say, maybe some of the indigenous folks were. I mean, yeah, just even reading about this and talking about the spirit of tobacco, I mean, people don't talk about that really often. Unless, you have training in that, or you submerge yourself in more shamanic oriented communities, and, you're kind of past that down. But for the normal person, thinking that plants have spirits or, archetypal energy that you could interact with, seems kind of foreign at times, or alien.
Totally. Like, we've been so abstracted from what tribal life looks like, magical thinking looks like, and having a deep interaction with an alive world. It's kind of gone, and psychedelics are a path to bring that back. But certainly there are risks and consequences here. Yeah, it's interesting calling it trickster. Or Michelle, go ahead if you had something you're going to say.
I guess I just don't fully agree. Like, I think that we can have an intimate relationship with our world and our planet, like, even without it being shamanic. Like, I think I do. I think I came from this, like, as just someone who loved being in the woods and just felt a deep connection. And whether or not I fully, like, articulated that every individual tree has a spirit or not, like, I felt it. And maybe not everyone does. I was lucky enough to, like, when I was a kid, I moved out of the city and into the country, like just a few miles away from where Kyle grew up as well. And I was lucky enough to like play in the woods and to learn from them. And before I took mushrooms, like, I had a very deep connection, and maybe I
Yeah, me
wasn't
too.
thinking about it in this like way, but I think it's almost like a false, um like a false, I don't know if false dichotomy is the right word, but it's like a kind of a falsehood to say that just because we're not tribal indigenous people that we don't understand or have a deep connection to our planet. Like, I don't believe that. I don't think most people, I think that we're kind of like fetishizing indigenous culture sometimes in the psychedelic community by saying things like that they're not exactly true. And it just seems like it's like an easy thing to say because we feel so disconnected, but like we're not that disconnected. And even people in indigenous cultures are like pretty, they can be disconnected from their own traditions, and they're all working so hard to like make money now because they're in, like, most of them are in like in Mexico anyway, like they're part of capitalism. And I don't know, it's all like mixed up and messed up. And I think that we romanticize it a little bit too much. That's what I've learned living in Mexico. Is like Americans love to romanticize indigenous culture and wisdom like it's the absolute truth. And like I think there's many ways to think about these things, and this is one very important way, but like it's not it. Again, like I think we need to broaden our minds in the psychedelic space. Like
There was a quote in the documentary Dances of Ecstasy, and the saying was that Western culture has left the Garden of Eden and wanting to return, so romanticizing that past. And those that are still, quote unquote, in the Garden of Eden also are wanting to escape it, right? And so you do hear this quite often. I mean, right, if you look at some of the indigenous people wanting to leave to make a living, that wisdom isn't possibly getting passed down to the younger generations because they want to, leave those areas and get jobs and do certain things. So I always kind of come back to that. And I completely agree. I think romanticizing about that is sometimes dangerous, right? Because we just get caught up in the image of that and think that it's truth when in reality it's not always truth.
we don't really fully understand, right? Because you're right.
Yeah.
Like, especially in Mexico, there's so many folks who leave their community to go work, like either in a bigger city like Oaxaca City or Mexico City or up to America. And they send money back, and they have to because everything's so expensive and their way of life is not sustainable right now. And the government takes their land, and Coca-Cola takes their water, and it's a mess.
Ugh.
Like here, there, and it's interesting here in Chiapas. When I tell my friends who are from here that I'm going into the woods to pick mushrooms, they all freak out. They're like, Michelle, you're going to die. Because there's that white amanita here, the death angel, and so that's actually, and that looks like a popular edible mushroom here in Mexico, champignon, like a famous one at the market. And so, like, there's been all these studies on it here in Chiapas. The reason there's so much stigma is because in the indigenous community of Chamula, a lot of people leave to go work in bigger cities, and then they come back. And this happened recently with a group of young men a few years ago. When they came back, they went mushroom hunting and picked a bunch of mushrooms and died because they couldn't correctly identify the edible mushrooms. And this keeps happening here because, there's a loss of knowledge because people have to leave to go support themselves. And then the rest of the culture, the mestizo culture here, the middle class, they're all like, oh no, you shouldn't pick mushrooms. You shouldn't even buy mushrooms at the market from indigenous people because they could be poisonous. And so it's so horrible. Like, I don't know. I just think there's just so much misunderstanding. And one of the answers is to like learn about the plants around you. Me and Kyle love talking about this, right? Like, and you went on that awesome like retreat with Kathleen Harrison a few years ago. But like, I think it is really important for folks to learn about the plants in their area and their woods and learn to identify. I mean, learning to identify edible mushrooms is a skill, and you should learn it slowly, right? So you don't make a possibly lethal mistake. But it's also just like makes me feel so connected to this world in a non-psychedelic way to go into the woods and to be like, oh, I know this flower. Oh, I know that's a Rusula Mexicana. And like, it just feels so good. And like, I think that more people should, or I don't like to tell anyone what to do, but I'm finding a lot of benefit out of it. And I would encourage others to try because it's another way to feel this like interconnectedness of all things. That's not taking a strong mushroom that could alter your mood for the next few weeks.
my little sister is actually teaching her 3-year-old all of the local plants in her area. And we just sent an insect book. So now he'll be able to identify all the insects. And it's such a big adventure, and he's really good at recognizing already. It's going to be fascinating to see how that develops.
And just what a beautiful thing to teach your 3-year-old, actually, just
Right.
like how the plants and the bugs and the flowers around you could be useful or could be poisonous or just like part of your world. And when you're that young and everything's so magical and special, actually, like, congrats to your sister. That's such a great thing.
Yeah, it's neat, isn't it?
I love that.
And it's part of the Druid tradition. If you want to join like a Druid group in the States or in Europe somewhere, like they make you read it, typically speaking, a number of books on natural. They call it natural history, I guess. Like 4 or 5 books on your like biome or region of the world. Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think important. Like if you're going to be fluent, like that's a big part of it.
Yeah, get to know your landscape, your environment. Yeah, Michelle, as you were talking about like your childhood growing up there, just reminded me of I was so connected to nature growing up, and just thinking about like we had names for all the little sections in our woods, and each section in the woods had a certain personality, and so yeah, I guess just come back to your point, like yeah, that was alive as a kid. There were like these kind of certain aspects, certain parts of the woods that would have those certain quote unquote like spirit elements to it, and yeah, just getting to learn the plants around you, I think is so important. I think we just like we constantly just look at these big quote unquote teacher plants when there's tons of little teacher plants around you all the time. You just need to take the time to learn about that. And how cool is it to then get to know the story around you, which is really important. What's your landscape trying to teach you and tell you? Yeah, I feel like we're always looking elsewhere at times, right? I guess that romanticizing again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really cool thing for Americans to do would be to learn about what the local Indigenous groups that were there before us, our towns, what were their stories of the plants around us? Like, that could be a beautiful thing. That also reminded me, like, so you told me that when we met up when I was in New Jersey in the summer, and we were sitting in, no, I don't mean to like say like, oh, you've already told me. I just mean like we were sitting in my backyard and we had recorded a Solidarity Fridays. And I just felt so special to be able to share that physical space where
it was nice.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm so privileged. Like my parents worked really hard to like have that space for us as kids, and just like those woods, we also had like little names for little spots. I think I was pointing out, I was like, yeah, this is where the dig was. It was like a fake archaeological site, and like, I had all these little like landmarks. And a really special thing I got to do when I was home, my parents were packing up that house to sell it. It's already sold. But when I was there in June, I was able to eat some mushrooms there and spend time in those woods and like reconnect with that. And they were mushrooms that grew in New Jersey that my friend and I picked. One of my best friends from high school, from childhood, one of my only 2 friends from childhood, showed me this patch in Western Jersey where ovoids grow. And we picked some. He actually was struggling to find any that year. There wasn't a lot of rain, but when I came, I was like, it was pouring, and I was like, they're singing to me like, it's fine, we're gonna find them. And we did. I swear I found the first one too. I was like, is this one? It looks kind of blue. And he was like, yes. And then we found all these other ones under false strawberry vines. So now when I see false strawberries in the woods, I'm like, ooh. But God, I think I read this article recently in like The Atlantic or something of someone renting their parents' house on Airbnb and like what they learned. And I'm like, I should write the other version of like, I took 7 grams of foraged mushrooms at my parents' house and I learned so much. I'm still like processing. It was only a few months ago, but like if anyone has the chance to do that, man, like I learned so much about my parents and about myself and where I come from and how hard they worked to give me all the things that they did. I'm a first gen American. Like like my dad worked so freaking hard to, and sometimes that, resulted in not getting all the attention that I wanted, right? And I think I
Mm,
have a lot of just kind of issues around that because he was always in the city working, so we could have this beautiful American life that he couldn't have, and in communist Bulgaria as like a Armenian
mm,
immigrant from a genocide, just like, I don't know. And it was, I started writing a little bit about it on my Instagram if folks want to go and read that. It's unfinished. I feel bad. But I think there's a lot of learning to do in like physical settings of, places that have a lot of meaning to you. And I think there's so much more to explore there. But I don't know, we could talk about some more of my own journey work since the book came out. It's been heavy,
mm.
but that was like a really just beautiful moment that I think that people often overlook as an option of how to do some really deep, like historical work.
Right. If we're grateful enough to have that home base for so long,
I know.
especially in a beautiful setting. I've actually heard from other people too, Michelle, like how important that kind of experience was. It's kind of mind blowing. But it sounds like it's a pretty serious, I don't know, initiation or part of the process for folks to really understand where they came from.
It was also my first trip was in the house too. Like I write about it in the intro to
Oh,
my book. Like I gobbled down a whole eighth of mushrooms in a parking lot, which if you know the town I grew up in, there's only like two big parking lots. and and then I went home as soon as I felt them, and I had the whole experience in my bedroom. And now that bedroom looks a
mm,
lot different, but to like be in that house alone and to go sit in that room, and there's still the same mirror. I have a mirror on the back of my door, and I spent a lot of time looking in that mirror when I was a 17-year-old Alice, just being like, "Oh my god, it's so much different than I thought." The world is so big, everything's gonna be okay, like all these big beautiful thoughts I had for the first time, and to revisit them and to see my face 15 years older in that same
mm.
mirror. Oh, it was just like, it was a lot of tears, but it was really just a
That's
beautiful,
profound.
it was so profound. I'm still processing. I'm kind of like in a dark night of the soul, I think, since it's like a lot has come up, and it's hard to just go straight back to work and try to just do everything, just keep going when, I think that's like a big part of what's left out of the conversation about mushrooms for healing is it's often like harder at first than it is easier. It's not like a light switch, like I was depressed and now I'm better and I'm moving on and everything's easy and my life is finally how I thought it would be. It's like all this stuff came up that now I have to figure out how to, I had it all compartmentalized really deep, and now it's up in the surface of my universe, and like, what do I do with it, and how do I move forward, and how do I not recompartmentalize it, but put it in a place where I can move on with my life. There needs to be some kind of sock drawer for my pain sometimes that I can just put it away. I'm very actually a sensitive person. It's hard for me to not just like feel all my emotions and everyone's reactions to them. It's probably why I am a mushroom person, but I don't know, it's been a little tricky coming back from that, and I'm still figuring it out, and I just hope that people know that this is like part of the process. And I think people get afraid that they take a big dose and they're broken now, but like I think you're just like still in it. The medicine's still working, as like those types of facilitators like to say. Anyway, I've been thinking about
Yeah,
all
thanks
of
for
this a
sharing
lot,
that.
so
I
it's
think
just like
that's
a
really,
good
no, I think
platform
it's
to
really
share.
important. Yeah.
Like
Mushrooms.
so much changes after an experience, and we often want to downplay how much changes, including relationships possibly changing or relationships to things and other people. Do you still believe in the faith you went in with? Like, do you have to really revisit your religion and all, your family, your primary relationships, your job? You know, there's so much here, and all of it can get activated. Um, and yeah, like I've had a lot of this. Like I was working in bullshit software jobs for 20 years. Like largely gave no shits about any of it. And I put 20 years of my life into it. And like, what does that mean? Like, it afforded me a lot of interesting opportunities, but it never really felt good. Um, and these psychedelic experiences, breathwork experience, just kept making shit go up to the point where when I got laid off, I was finally like, thank goodness. I really needed a kick in the ass to get out of the nest. But that analogy doesn't work for every scenario, right? Um, but yeah, people should know that it's not necessarily going to be an easy road. Um, yeah, a lot of people need this dark night of the soul. Like mine was horrendous, like, but aren't we all, don't we all have horrendous dark nights? But like, eventually it rebuilt out of it, and it was a more solid foundation after burning everything down for a while. Um, yeah, I haven't really discussed that too much on the show, but it's an interesting thing I should probably get into eventually.
Yeah,
We're all
yeah, it
still
is
processing.
interesting.
Yeah.
I was
No.
chatting with somebody on a podcast, and they were asking me, like, what was I going through when I was in the midst of that spiritual emergence and early psychedelic experiences? And my response was, I was just trying to keep my feet on the ground. Like that whole process from like 16, and then it really started getting amplified around 2021 to 25. I mean, I was in a deep process, even though I was like, able to like go through school and do all that stuff, like psychologically, spiritually, I was in a kind of a weird place of just being so ungrounded. I'm sure people looking at me didn't see that, but I mean, deep down inside, it was dark night of the soul type shit. Please just let me return to normal.
No, totally. Yeah, my dark night looks a little different. And it was hard because at first after that trip, it was like I felt so good, like maybe a little too good, like a little manic almost, like and I had this big kind of obvious lesson, and it was just like show up with gratitude. And it was mostly for my parents because I was with them and I was showing up with some resentment and anger, and I see them like twice a year, and I saw on my trip that was like what a waste, what an ugly thing to show up with to people who love you and have literally like dedicated the last 30 years of their life to you, and to just show up with anger about like some little thing, or like maybe it wasn't a little thing, but still I was able to actually, I just was like glowing. I was like a gratitude Buddha for like a week, and I was just like I had never been kinder to my parents, I feel like, in my life, which is actually like I'm gonna cry. It's like kind of shameful, but it was beautiful, and to see the reaction to it, and to like not have like quick reactions, or like to not just like nitpick at each other, and to instead just like enjoy each other's company. Like it was so beautiful, and I really wish I just wish that feeling could last a little longer. It's hard to hold on to. And I wonder if we all had like some kind of family experience together, which they're not ready for, and that's okay. But someday, like, I don't know, maybe it would last longer. I don't know. It's hard to say. I did really want to leave them with like a gram each to like do the same thing, and I had 2 grams, and they were just like, no, they didn't want it. They were like, Michelle, this house is so much work, and packing it up and selling all this shit. It's like it's so far removed from sentimentality at this point. They were just exhausted, and even though I thought that maybe a small experience could help like reconnect them and just be present in that house, because that's what I got to do. I got to like just sit in every room and kind of like live in the memories and all the happy times of being like a little kid bouncing on that bed, or like, all these little things. It was so, I needed that to say goodbye, and I'm really glad I got it. It's not what they needed to say goodbye, so that's okay. But yeah, I think about that a lot, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that with us.
Yeah,
it's kind of a vulnerable thing to share very kind of like deep, intimate, family-oriented stuff on the show here.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even gone into the deeps. This is the stuff that I'm like already practiced and comfortable sharing. It was like the next onion layer that I stopped writing the thing publicly on Instagram because it was too personal, especially for my like, or stuff about my parents. Like I didn't want to air their dirty laundry on Instagram.
Yeah.
Like thousands of people were liking it, or at least like 1,000 on each post, and it was like, you know what? maybe this is like a book someday, or I don't know, but I can't like air out my mom's mothering mistakes on Instagram or something. That's like the least respectful thing I could do right now. So I'm still figuring out how to share the rest of this story, but you're welcome. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Clearly I
I
wanted to
love this
talk
guy.
about it. So,
I really love this idea of intergenerational tripping too.
Yeah.
Like having experiences together and journeying together. I recall a story years ago about a group mescaline ceremony with some people, and there were some fathers and sons in there. And some of the stories reported back about like intergenerational kind of energy transfer and some other interesting things were really fascinating. Um, and I don't know that we have enough of these stories at this time to really dig in with any depth on this topic. But I think there's something here.
yeah.
What it is, hope we find out.
I've heard such beautiful, yeah, like mushrooms together or other ceremonial work. Like a colleague of mine, told me he was just in Tepetlan, like with his whole family doing ceremony, and I thought that was, he is just so lucky to do that. I keep thinking, and if my mom and dad are listening, like hear me out. Ecstasy or MDMA, I think, is what my family needs, like together, or at least for like a first step. I don't know. I think that like we would all like that. You could just like kind of talk openly and just like stop lying to make other people feel better. And it's so much easier to hear. I really think that, at least for my family, where we don't have a lot of like big traumas, it's just like little resentments and things. Like I think ecstasy, but that's maybe just me airing out my plans. I'm just trying to manifest an ecstasy night with my parents. I'm gonna stop talking, but that's the plan. That's my new plan.
I don't hate the idea. I was chatting recently with somebody about like what would I like want to get into first. Like, and I think Kyle, the recent episode you did with Will and I forget the other lady's name.
Devin.
Devin was talking a lot about MDMA being safer and like a good, like, I think breathwork and MDMA are a great place to start. Like, not wildly intense. Again, Michelle, back to your initial point, like dipping your toes in, and not getting horrified. Like, I've not had a horrifying MDMA experience, nor really seen one in person, and it just feels so safe. Certainly there's some limits and boundaries you got to put up, but largely this stuff is incredibly safe, and not that threatening either, right?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful one for friends and family to connect. Me and my partner once or twice a year, like, it just helps so much. Like, you just air some things and then just like enjoy each other's company in a beautiful place. Like, there's really nothing like it. Mushrooms can be beautiful too. It's a little harder. I think it's like you have to be, I don't know, you both have to, I think, know maybe what you're getting into in a way, or both want that experience. I think if you're both craving like fun, then it might not be the one. And that's okay. Like, but if you're both craving like a deep experience or to see things from a new way, like, I think that, yeah, like we need to talk about why mushrooms, why MDMA, why not choose acid, And like, I think for me, I have very like clear, I'm like, oh, well, that experience, definitely just a microdose of acid or like whatever. Like, but that's because I have these relationships with these substances, and I can kind of like be like, I can just make a decision like that and it feels right. But without that experience, it's really hard. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like when the conversation is only about these, legal, clinical ways of doing things, kind of leaves out a lot of other really important things that the average person who can get access to these things wants to know. And so that's kind of where I've been at with my thinking about like, where are we going as a psychedelic community? Like, what's the point of all of this? And my journey work can get really deep on that, and it can be so existential and meta because I'll be like on mushrooms thinking about the point of mushrooms, and it's like, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we need to shake it up a little. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had plenty of those experiences over the years.
They
Like,
can be
oh, yeah, what
heavy.
are we doing here?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just hope the rest of the, community is sometimes going in and thinking about it and not ignoring the lessons we receive. Because I think that's a tendency. Well,
Hmm.
you can't make money doing that. Like, let's just power through with the old plan. But like, I think part of our integration as a community, or whatever you want to call psychedelics right now, industry, ugh. But like, we need to be taking the medicine every once in a while and listening to what it says, because if we're not thinking for ourselves, like, what's the point of all this?
Leary's TFYQA, think for yourself and question authority. You gotta remember that. Yeah,
He's
because
a
Michelle,
wise
back to your
man.
point earlier, like we have easy answers for, oh, that scenario, this. It's like we don't have enough clear data yet. We don't have enough experience to be there as a culture. And
And
understanding that we might be really wrong. Like maybe we're right for people we're closest with. Maybe we're very wrong for everybody else, and maybe even those people we're closest with.
and maybe we should never be like making decisions for anyone else, right? Like, just make decisions for yourself. Take in some guidance and read some recommendations, but at the end of the day, you have to make all your own decisions. You don't have to listen to what everyone else is doing, even if it's on Instagram or the news or whatever. Like, my mom used to say this, it's such a cliche, but like, if everyone was jumping off a bridge, Michelle, which that's her Queen's accent. Oh my God, sorry. Like, would you do it too? And like, no, like, of course not. And sometimes I feel like in the psychedelic world, we're all just following each other off a bridge and it doesn't make any sense anymore. And I've been struggling with that a little. I'm figuring it out. Just having these kinds of open conversations helps. And I just encourage other folks to just be honest with themselves and everyone around them, and just always make your own decisions.
Right. Yeah.
Words
The
wisdom.
the experts are there to help you make the decision.
Weigh your
And
choices. Yeah.
you should understand they're your choice. Yeah, at least for now. It's your choice on what you want to do or not do. Yeah, like don't get your arm twisted and eat 5 grams if it's really not what you want to do.
Yeah.
You might have a bad time.
Or like
It
go
might not
into
be worth
some
it.
weird shaman's apartment in Brooklyn and whatever. Like, you might not need that,
Whoa,
right?
don't
Like,
get me started.
I know. Well, that's why I wrote my book, because I really think
Yeah.
that there's safe ways to work with this on your own for most folks, and you might want to discover those before putting your vulnerable psychedelic out self with some stranger that might not have your best intentions in mind. It's sad but true. And so, especially with
Yeah.
It's
mushrooms,
kind
whether,
of
I don't know. Tell me.
it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, of like, for those that, like, I guess, develop their own relationship. Like, say you got introduced to mushrooms when you were young, there was really no instruction book, you started to develop your own kind of like narrative around that experience, and then kind of coming into a space where people are telling you it needs to be done a certain way. Yeah, I think that's interesting, to just think about, like, for all those that have developed their own kind of narrative, their own instructions, their own ritual around it, not having any sort of guidelines, over the years. I think that's fascinating, right? Because that's what people have been doing for how many years when they have interactions with plants, right? It's just their relationship to the plant, and starting to, develop that. Like, okay, I'm going to follow this. I'm going to do this next time. I'm going to do this different. Like, oh, the mushrooms told me to do this. All right, well,
And even
what
like
happens when.
teenagers figure all that out, right? I feel like me and my friends,
Yeah,
we didn't like really read much about this. We didn't go into the
I didn't at all.
Groffian
No.
literature, but we knew after the first trip that we should like just be in a really small group in a really beautiful place, like without any parents around, and we would make those situations and like have everything in hand, like any food we needed, like. And that's also like who I spoke to for my book. Like, yes, I spoke to a bunch of experts, but I also spoke to like just 20 regular mushroom people who use psychedelic mushrooms and have for years. And, they all have their own little special like things they like to add, like fort building with comfy materials. And then you and your partner share all your secrets. And there's just so many cute little things that people told me they do. And it was all generally the same. It was It was a quiet, comfortable place that's private and chill, and then just like alterations on the details and stuff. But like, you know, people who use mushrooms are quite smart, and I think a lot of them are being ignored or not part of this new conversation, and that's a shame. It shouldn't be like that. I think a lot of them want nothing to do with this new clinical world either. They're like, you can have that. Like, I have my ritual and it works for me. And I'm just like, want people to develop their own rituals and find out what works for them. That's why I collected so many in one place. So you can just kind of pick and choose what's right to you. Everyone's different. And yeah, in the true, like, think for yourself and question authority, like, manner, just your psilocybin mushroom companion. It'll help you figure it out. And, I don't know if you really need everyone else telling you what to do. I think you know what you want to do. You just got to listen.
And it comes back to, like, the Grothian perspective, really listening to that inner healing intelligence, that inner healer, right? Creating that container for you to explore that. And that's kind of like the core of that work, is just creating that container and developing that relationship with that inner healing intelligence, or whatever you want to call it. You call it spirit, call it guides, I don't know, whatever.
No, totally. Intuition, your gut.
Intuition, gut, yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the gist of it. That was great. But yeah, that's about all I wanted to say. That's, my thinking since the book came out. I'm glad folks are liking it and reaching out and reading it. And I think what I found is, like, both experienced mushroom people and totally naive psychedelic, beginners have both found a lot of value in it and found it helpful, and that my tone is, like, easy to read and relatable. And so just thanks for everyone who's reached out and bought the book. And yeah, if it sounds like something you might be into, Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion, it's on all the sites: Bookshop, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. And I hope it helps.
I think it has, and I think it will continue to, Michelle. So thanks for your effort after writing it, and all that before publishing it. I'm sure it's been more labor of love than anything, but I'm glad you've done it, and you gave a voice to the existing mushroom culture.
I tried.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
hopefully the coming mushroom culture, right?
It's growing. I mean, yeah, and like, it's all mycelial, it's coming for you. So just prepare yourself. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, right, mushroom culture is growing, and I just wanted folks to just feel comfortable and accepted in that space and just learn all the lingo, essentially.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Thankful for mushrooms. May or may not have eaten some over the weekend. And can't wait for more. Yeah.
Happy 9/20, everybody.
Happy 9/20.
Yes.
I hope you have a beautiful holiday. Well, actually, do we know the story behind 9/20 briefly before we cut?
We shared a little bit about it on one of our last Solidarity Friday episodes, but yeah, I pulled it up. I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but it started off as kind of like an educational type of event to really signify the importance of mushrooms, kind of like with cannabis, with 420. And why did they pick 9/20 is because it's at the fall equinox and at the height of mushroom season.
Does that sound right, Michelle?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it. Happy foraging, everybody.
Cool. Yeah. There's a lot to say there, and yeah, it's a beautiful pick for a holiday. Out here, mushrooms have been going off for months and months, but I'm sure it's only going to accelerate in other places.
Get a lot of rain this time of year, so it's like, yeah, I think, like, especially in the UK and on the Northwest right now, they're finally getting, like, all of their good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Michelle, for being here with us. I hope everybody goes and checks out your book. What's your preferred place where people order it from?
You can buy it on my website, michellejanikian.com in the US. But then bookshop.org is a great place to order it, where you are, like, supporting independent bookstores. It'll usually come from a bookstore in your area. You can also, like, ask your library to get it, which could be a cool thing, and then they'll probably
Yeah.
buy it, and then more people will have access to it. So there's that.
I like it.
Yeah.
I heard once, this is not very practical or feasible for most folks, but if you translate into Finnish, the Finland government actually puts one in every library. It might be cheaper to just mail one to every library, but it's an interesting concept. I'm looking at it for other stuff, but
Beautiful.
folks, think about it when you're writing these psychedelic books. Maybe there's other countries with good stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah. A small, interesting country trying to keep its culture alive. And that's their decision on how to do that. Part of their decision on how to do that. Anyway, support us by leaving a small monthly donation. Patreon.com/psychedelics today. As low as $2 a month helps us a ton. We also have Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists kicking off September 23. We'd love to have you. It's an 8-week program giving you a great foundation into the psychedelic space and how you might want to find your way through this, strange but marvelous field that's developing. So check it out. Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, psychedelicstoday.com or psychedeliceducationcenter.com. All right, everybody. I think that's enough for now. Thanks again, Michelle and Kyle, and can't wait for the next episode.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Much love.
Mush.